Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. I'm Amanda and I'll be your host for this and all episodes of the show. This week on the podcast, I am super excited to be joined by Susi Hately. Susi is the founder of Functional Synergy, and she joined me all the way from British Columbia, Canada, to talk about yoga, her yoga story, why she got into yoga, and how she believes that healing is possible. And something that I really love about Susi is that she's combined the practices of yoga with her Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology. She worked at the Vancouver Pain Clinic for a number of years, and then she's continued to build a yoga business. So we talk a little bit about anatomy and some of those sort of non-business related topics. And then we also dive into the business that she's created around her yoga teaching, as well as her background in kinesiology and how she's built Functional Synergy. Before we dive into this episode of the podcast, we have Blake here today with this week's Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week.
Hello, yoga business badasses. This is Blake with Schedulicity. It's easy to create and market a yoga retreat using your Schedulicity account. All you need to do is create a workshop with the dates, location, price, and description for your retreat. Next, use one of our email marketing templates to send an informative message to your client list. You can require a deposit or prepayment at the time of booking if you'd like, which can help your students commit.
As always, thank you so much for supporting Schedulicity. If you have any questions about anything that they're doing or anything that we're talking about on the podcast, make sure you either reach out to myself or to the support team at support@schedulicity.com. And if you're interested in learning more about Schedulicity or getting started with an account, you can head on over to schedulicity.com. All right, on to today's episode with Susi. Welcome to the podcast today, Susi. I'm super excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you for asking me to be on this. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me as well. And where are you joining me from today?
So I am on the B.C. coast. I'm on the Sunshine Coast. My family has a cabin that's been in our family for a long time. And so my husband and my two little 1.5-year-olds were here for the break and having a great time.
Amazing. And where are you originally from?
Originally, I am a Toronto girl, and I weaved my way to the west thinking I wanted to settle in Vancouver. And so I went to school in Victoria, my university years, and then spent a couple of years in Vancouver, and then ultimately found my way to Calgary. So that's where home is now and has been since about 1997.
Oh, nice. Amazing. Very cool. It's always fun talking to somebody who is from the same place as me. I grew up in Cochrane and then went to university in Calgary and called Calgary home for a number of years before I moved to Canmore. So I'm a Alberta girl as well.
Alberta's great. I love Alberta.
Yeah, I love Alberta, but not in the winter. I'm not a fan of Alberta winters. Which is why I'm in Mexico right now.
Very, very true. Yes.
Yeah. Although I was talking to my parents last night because they're leaving for a trip tomorrow, and they were saying it's cold in Canmore, and into the mountains, but it's not as soon as you get out. And they're like, there's just no snow out of the mountains, and I was like, oh, maybe I need to go back home and experience winter again because it's been a couple of years for me. But yeah, Alberta's great.
Right, but that's not really winter.
I know. And it's funny too, because they're like, oh yeah, it goes from negative 14 Celsius to we get out of the mountains, it's 0. And I'm like, it was 22 today in Mexico City. Negative 14 is pretty cold for me at this point.
Yes. You adapt very quickly, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But so there's lots of stuff I want to get into in this conversation, but I want to back up. Can you tell me a little bit about how you first got into yoga and a little bit about your yoga story?
Sure. I had been an athlete through all of my younger years, and I was quite successful in my teenage years. And I started to get hurt in the latter part of my sort of late teens, early 20s. And then I started to have more and more chronic pain, which is we now refer to as persistent pain. And it really started to constrict and constrain my life. And I was still able to do stuff, but it was really hard to do it. Very classic persistent pain way of being. And then the person I was living with at the time, she said, you really should try yoga. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. I'm not going to do yoga. And that was back in the early sort of mid-ish 90s. But then something in me just said, do it. And so I went to the local church where the yoga was happening, and I stepped on my mat, and I thought the teacher was a complete wingnut. And I looked around and thought, does everyone else know that this person's a wingnut? And I thought the entire practice was entirely weird. It was so not according to my athletic background. And yet there was a light bulb that went off for me, and I couldn't ignore that. And I went back, and then I went back, and then I went back. And after having 2 years of like consistent, persistent pain where I had seen everyone that I could with my measly university level student-based income, which was nil. But I had seen a lot of people to try and help me. Within 4 months, all my pain was gone. I was back running 10Ks pain-free, and I sort of had a hallelujah moment. And I was also, at the time, working at a chronic pain center where we were helping people who had been in motor vehicle accidents and work-related accidents. And I just kind of so happened started to practice and play with the yoga I was learning, of course, not knowing a clue what I was doing, but integrating it into the exercise programs that I was giving these people, and they were getting better faster. So I was like, okay, there's something going on here. I have no clue what it is, but it's working, and it's working well. So that's how it all kind of got rolling.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I always love hearing those stories because I think that so many of our yoga stories start out with going to a yoga class and being like, this is really weird. Like, do people know that this is weird?
Yeah. Yeah. And now I'm a complete convert. And I'm like, how did I even think it was weird? Like, it's funny. Yeah. It's really funny, the evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And so was it the fact that you were experiencing, a pain-free life, and then also seeing people that you'd started to work with experiencing pain-free that made you actually want to start teaching more? Or what was it that kind of inspired that?
That's a great question. And I've thought about it a lot, and I'm not entirely sure. I think it was more one of those moments that kept kind of being a moment, and a moment kept being a moment of there's something working here. And I remember being out for one of my first runs, so to speak, and thinking, I really should just do 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And I still remember the moment. Like, that was a clear moment of, oh my God, I'm really going to do 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And I did. And I felt so good. And I thought, why am I behaving this way? Like, there had been a shift in the perception of myself and how I was going about my life. And I just started to grow my awareness. And I can't say there was a moment of like, this yoga thing is the reason why. There was just this fundamental knowing that the yoga thing was the reason why. And I wasn't one of those people who then started getting on my soapbox and saying everyone should do yoga. It wasn't like that at all. It was I just kept doing it, and I actually didn't get into teaching or even thinking about teaching right away because I couldn't see how to make a living at it. And so I didn't even think to do that. I just thought I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And then I landed in a teacher training program. So it's there, though. That's a space which I can't give you a specific answer. It was more one of those, the opportunities kind of kept arising, and they kept arising, and they kept arising. It was like the path kept being shown to me. Like, that sounds so woohoo, but it truly was one of those organic processes of, dare I say the word manifestation, even though I wasn't even attempting to do that. I didn't actually say I am going to be a teacher or I want to teach. It just happened that way for me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
totally
it was a
understand
link. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It was like more of a linking of moments that then led to like, here I am. Like, and how did I get here? I'm not really sure, but I can look back and go, yeah, there was a moment, and there was a moment, but I can't, there was no linear thought out process at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely understand that. I think it's interesting because sometimes there's sort of like that I don't know if it's like a theory, but it's like, you know, you see something 3 times and then you kind of like take it a bit more seriously. And I feel like it sounds like it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, you know, these series of events happen that eventually kind of all of a sudden you see a teacher training program and it's something that you hadn't thought about before. You're like, maybe I should do this. Like it's available and it's right in front of me. Like I should just go ahead and dive in type thing.
Yeah. And I remember the one that I took, there were 2 programs at the time in Calgary because I had been living in Vancouver and then I moved to Calgary, and that's when I took another class and started, I noticed that I was looking around for teacher training programs. And there was one program, there were 2 at the time. And there was one that the person who was the registrant just said, well, you have to be very committed to the program. And I thought, okay, well, I don't think I want to do this program. Like it just seemed kind of harsh. And then there was this other program that was a bit more free, and it was a bit more like I was working full time at the time, and it just worked better. And then that led me into meeting a yoga teacher who was based out of Pune, who had come to Calgary and taught, of all things, the kinesiology of yoga. And I thought, these are 2 things that I'm doing. I'd gotten a B.Sc in kinesiology from the University of Victoria. I was very much into anatomy and biomechanics. And here was this medical doctor who was a yoga teacher based out of Pune who was combining the 2. And it really struck me that, this is interesting. And then I went to study with him. And I'd already become a teacher by that point. And I went to study with him about 2 years later. And that really launched what I'm doing.
Yeah. And so at that point you were doing, was your career sort of working with people in like sports medicine, kinesiology? Is that what you were doing at the point that you got your teacher training and did this other one with the teacher from Pune?
Well, what's funny is that after I left the chronic pain center in Vancouver, I vowed I would never work with people in pain ever again. And I went traveling and then happened to move to Calgary and actually got a job working as a disability case manager. So people who were on long-term disability, and the insurer was outside of province. And so they needed someone in province to manage the file and visit the person. And so I went, and I was young, right? I was young and fresh out of school and very, very optimistic is my natural state. And I would visit these people and become horrified at the lack of rehab that they'd had. And I was basically being set on them to close their files, which really isn't my way of being. And I would look at them and think, this is crazy. And I would talk to the people involved in their care and thinking, this is crazy. They're just not getting good rehab. So I learned very quickly what good rehab was. And I also learned quickly how to negotiate, how to help people and get what they needed. And I was doing that at the time. And then when I got back into, when I started teaching yoga, it just so happened that the people coming to my classes pretty much all had pain. And I don't know whether that is standard for most yoga teachers. I think it probably is, but it struck me that I don't think I'm getting out of this idea of working with people in pain. It's obviously something that I'm supposed to be doing. And then I trusted that and I followed that and then was able to engage with massage therapists and physical therapists and physiotherapists in a way that was collaborative. And so I was able to start very quickly at being a team builder and a communicator so that people got well and no one really felt that I was stepping on toes with what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. It makes me think about how, I think you're probably right, like most people coming to yoga classes probably are in pain. Now working with clients, like do you teach group classes? Do you do like more one-on-one? Like what does your business look like now compared to how it looked like, I guess what would that have been like 20 years ago?
Yeah, man, that sounds like a long time ago. I got my teacher training in 1999, and then I started doing therapeutic work solely in 2001. And that was a lot of group classes and a few privates. And then I got into more teacher training, and then I got into more traveling. So then it didn't make sense to teach group classes because I just wasn't around enough to provide consistency. So then I moved more into private. So now I've got a private base as well as training other teachers in what it is that I do.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, that's really cool to hear about that. And so I want to go into like the business side of things, but I'm also curious, since you have this like really strong background in terms of like the body, I'd love to dive into a bit about sort of anatomy and just like functional movement and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Like, so you started seeing these people coming into classes that have pain. Like when somebody comes into a yoga class with pain, what does it sort of look like as a yoga teacher to actually like aid this person with their pain and help them kind of feel better in their body?
Great question. And my answer might be surprising, and that is it had never been about pain, even though that's what they came in with. For me, it was about movement. And I knew that when I could help someone move better, that their pain would go down. So the focus really was on helping people move better. And I remember the first studio that I'd worked in, there were no drop-ins. It was all registered class. And they were about 8-week registered classes. And the director had said, okay, here are the poses that they need to be able to do by the end of this 8-week beginner series so that they can move on to the next level of classes. And I looked at the poses, and I looked at the group, and I thought, oh, good Lord, how am I going to do this? I have to fulfill, this was my first teaching gig, and I wanted to do good by it. And yet I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to do triangle. There's no way extended side angle is in the books. Like there was just no way. And because they couldn't move, right? The pain and not being able to move well go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And so I figured, okay, I better break these movements down into component parts. And that's really what started this model that I utilize today. And I just help people move the parts of their body better. So for example, there's a lot in yoga that has to do with hip mobility and hip stability, but they didn't have it. So I wasn't about to do triangle when they didn't have that basic component. I needed to help build that component first. And then over that 8-week period of time, as they move better, we could actually do that particular pose. And I was able to fulfill the requirement of the studio I worked at. And more importantly, I was able to fulfill what people's needs were. And so their pain started to go down, and they started to feel better. And so for me, it was like, okay, this is cool. This is working really well. And it just validated the way that I operated, so that when I started working more therapeutically with people, that's where I started. I started at that component place and then built them up into the pose, because I feel like the yoga asana, I think that they are some of the best movements out there. And that might be surprising for some people to hear me say, because we hear about how yoga is so injury and pain based. And it's mostly because people just aren't moving well. Mm-hmm. And when people move well, yoga poses or yoga positions or the movement into the positions can be some of the most functional movements out there if we know what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting to hear that, because I do feel like when I talk to people who are kind of, I guess more working with bodies in the functional movement way, it's sort of like, Ashtanga yoga is not really like the best sort of movements, but it definitely makes sense to me that if you have mobility, like really you should be able to do, like those movements aren't unnatural for the body. It's just like depends on our mobility. For yoga teachers listening, I think that we can probably all relate to that feeling of like, somebody walks into the yoga studio and you can immediately see that like their body does not have the mobility that is necessary for the poses, kind of like you had experience within that registered class. What are some of the ways to just get somebody started when they're just not able to get into a pose like triangle, or side angle is just not something that they have like the range of motion for. Like, what are some ways to kind of get them there and to build that up, like some basic movement tips or anatomy tips and that sort of thing?
I think the one key piece is to understand that most people can't do triangle. I think that's a fundamental piece. And so I would start by questioning, why is that one in the sequence in the first place? Not to say that it won't ever be, but it's to sort of think about that that's the sort of the overarching idea. And to step back and to just, first of all, look and say, okay, can my people actually do this or not? And then if you are in a situation where they can do it, like they do have that ability to move their pelvis and their legs in that way, then if you've got a new person coming in, then teaching them this idea of, it's not about a shape and it's not about a static pose. And this is really, really key. It's about how we move from point A to point B, B being the pose. So it's in the trajectory of that movement that's really important. And for them to develop the awareness of how it is that they're moving. So this is very different than saying, listen to your body, although in effect it is. A lot of teachers will tell me, I would tell people to listen to their body. And then I'm like, I don't even know what that really means. Like that they're saying this to me and they're like, I don't feel like I'm really serving my person. And so this is what I would say is just have them notice, like when they're going from point A, from whatever standing position they're in. So maybe they've stepped their legs wide. When they rotate the front leg, can they actually rotate that leg bone in the pelvis? And so to play there first, because a lot of people can't actually do that. And so if they can play there first and they can recognize, okay, does this move or not? And then if the group is going into triangle, then that's where the person can start with. And then if they can do it, then they can start to move their pelvis in a direction towards triangle, but recognize, okay, are they actually moving the pelvis on the leg? Or are they started doing a side bend and shortening up between their ribs and their pelvis? Or are they leading with the rib cage and not moving through their hips at all? And so it's looking at that component and saying to the person, okay, I want you to play with this trajectory here, or I want you to just play with the component of triangle and work there. And to frame it, this is what's also important, is to frame it that you're not wrong or bad or behind or a yoga dolt or whatever. You're not any of that. It's recognizing that is just what your body is doing. And if you move in this way, your body will actually transform and shift very quickly. So those are the sort of the key points there, is to shift away from the pose being a static thing and instead think about it, okay, what's actually required to move toward that position and then work there and develop the awareness there. Because most of the issues that we face are under our level of awareness. And so when we can bring them up into awareness, we can make a whole lot of change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that, because I think I think if you've been maybe like practicing yoga for a while and you do like a regular like meditation practice, I think saying like tune into what your body's saying might make sense to that person. Like, I think that if somebody says that to me, like I feel like I like have done so much work in that I'm already like tuned into what my body's telling me. Like, I'm like, oh, like what's the sensation I'm feeling today? And like, oh, this movement feels weird. But that's coming from like years of doing that and having like, before being a yoga teacher and practicing yoga, like being a dancer and that sort of thing. So I think, that's a great place to start, is to just shift that language and ask people to look for specific things. Because I think you're right. Like the average person's like, oh, like listen to my body. Like, I don't know how to listen to my body. Like, I haven't been listening to my body for like, the entire time I've been living. So I don't even know what that means. And then, starting with something as basic as like that external rotation with the leg. Is there anything else from your experience, like working with the body kind of outside of the scope of just a yoga teacher, that you find like when you get into sort of the typical asanas that, something like triangle, that you're kind of like, oh, this one is like quite hard for most people in their body? Are there any other poses that are kind of like that, maybe we should just be looking out for or watching how we sequence or teaching more of a beginner sort of version of it?
Pigeon is another one. People love it for the feeling that they get. And unfortunately, the way that a lot of people are moving into it, they put their pelvis into a really funky place. And so they might get a really awesome feeling, but that feeling doesn't align with actually getting better mobility. And so people can get seduced by the sensation and continue to do it thinking it might be beneficial, but they haven't actually, the movement has been compensated on the way to it. So I think that's one of them. Extended side angle can be another one. And I think those are the ones that are like right top of mind at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And with Pigeon, is modifying by doing like a figure 4, like a pigeon on the back? Is that like a better way to kind of get into the pose? Or when it comes to sort of like giving people like a good hip opener, is there something else that you do?
So figure 4 is great. The key that people have to pay attention to is when they're on their back and they lift that leg up. So let's say it's the right leg. We're playing with the right hip. Mm-hmm. They're lifting that right leg into flexion. So the knee's coming towards the belly and the angle of that hip's getting smaller. And then they need to rotate that leg and place the ankle on the knee. A lot of times when people do that, their pelvis also moves. And when the pelvis moves, then we're no longer actually working the area of the hip that we're intending. Mm-hmm. So that when the leg lifts and then the leg rotates, it really needs to be the leg lifting into flexion and the leg actually rotating. And if it's a pelvis shift or a rib shift, then we're now doing something other than that. And our brain thinks we're doing it, but in fact, we're not doing it. So that's a key. And the other part of figure 4 to be careful about is, or at least cognizant about, is if you're working with someone who's limited in their hips and they've brought their legs up and then they're reaching through with their arms, excuse me, a lot of people who are quite limited or stiff, they will lift their torso up to try and reach the leg and pull their leg towards them. Their pelvis will then start to lift and it becomes more of a sort of a funky, rounded position that looks quite uncomfortable. And they might, again, get a really good stretch, but the stretch isn't aligned with the good mechanics. And so this is where stretch sensation can get a little funky because a lot of people equate it to, oh yes, I'm doing some good work, when it doesn't mean that you are, or it doesn't mean that you aren't. It's just a sensation. So when someone's doing that figure 4 is just to make sure that the leg is actually moving in the pelvis and that pelvis is quiet as the movement's happening. And as people are going into Pigeon, a way to play with it that might be interesting is start by just being in lunge and then start to play around with moving that leg bone in the pelvis. And so that ultimately you're seeing is the knee coming out to the side, but the focus is on the leg bone and the hip. And just start to see where you begin to compensate. Start to see where the movement, in a sense, breaks down, and start to see where you lose. And it's not about, oh, I better pull in my abs or I better do something with my back leg or front leg to make this work. It's just actually notice where it breaks down and recognize that's where it breaks down. There's nothing you need to do. Like just see it and then work within the range that you actually move well without having to load other things up. And you'll start to see a change begin to happen. So that's one. Those are a couple of little ideas that people can play with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting talking about that because I was practicing at a studio that I was teaching at a couple of years ago with like a yoga teacher that was one of my good friends at the time. And he came up to me one time while I was in figure 4 on my back and he was like, "You're totally twisted." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, he's like, "You're not square." And he like adjusted me just enough. And I was like, "No, like now I'm crooked." And he was like, "You're definitely not." Yeah. And it's so interesting because there is that, like, even somebody who, like I just said, you know, I can connect with my body and I'm pretty aware, yes. But there's still those things where it's like, I go into that pose and my body just naturally does what it needs to do to get there, which is not necessarily like the range of motion we're looking for.
Yes.
So yeah, that's
and I think the important thing that all yoga teachers need to understand is, while we have good awareness, there's always more to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when yoga teachers come to my trainings, there's commonly this, you have got to be kidding me. Like, that's really my range. Like, seriously? And it's like, yep, that's the range that's truly available. How could I not be aware of this? Well, there's a ton of stuff that you're not aware of. And I like to share with them to say, right now I am doing like 3 or 4 things that I have no clue that I'm aware of. And you can see that I'm doing them. I can't tell because my eyes only look outward. And so there's a ton. And I love to share that when I first started online and training, and I was videotaping myself, and then I was watching the videos back as I was editing them, I started to notice all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's what I do. So that's why that's happening. And so it was really fascinating to be able to see, which is why I'm such a proponent. If you really want to play around with your awareness and improve your movement, is to take video, like pull out your phone, set up a video, watch yourself move, and be surprised and be amazed at what you're actually doing. And then once you see it, you can then feel it, and then you can start to make the change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I had the exact same thing the first time I made an online course. It's like these things that felt like, I felt like I did this so well. And then I look at it, I was like, oh God, is that what I look like?
But it provides a little bit of humility, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, totally. But it's even, I was working with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, I was in Charleston, and she's like, how am I able to do this without like you being here? And I was like, the best thing for you to do is to videotape yourself and to watch it back. I was like, you can send it to me if you want, and I can give you like some pointers with things that we were working on. But I was like, the best thing is for you to just watch it, because you'll see stuff right away as soon as you watch it. And she was like, that sounds horrifying. And I'm like, it kind of is in a way, but it's also something that's like so good, because you don't realize the things that you're doing or not doing when you're just like in your body moving in space.
Totally. And I agree. I understand that it is horrifying. And there was a training that I was leading, and I had a photographer come in to do some photos, and I saw the photos after, and I went, oh my goodness, she caught me in some awesomely awful positions. But I mean, again, I hadn't been aware, but having seen the photos, like, oh, I could figure it out, right? I could see it. And so it might lurch in the stomach a little bit initially. But then the awareness is there, and change can happen. And that is some of the quickest and most progressive ways that we can support ourselves moving forward, is understanding what's under a level of awareness. I had this experience with this energy healer many, many moons ago, who said, that the issues in our body are like the stuff that's expressing itself is merely expressing itself. And the actual issue is not there. The actual issue is stagnant energy, is how he talked about it. And how I interpreted that and how I've utilized that is, it's, the pain isn't where the problem is. The issue actually, and the problem lies under our level of awareness. And when we can recognize what's under our level of awareness, then we change everything. And yes, it can be a bit lurch of a feeling and utterly horrible and initially. But the power that it provides, the reality that it provides, now we're actually solving the problem that is, and not cycling around in the problem that isn't. And so we get better a whole lot faster.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's always interesting when we do find out those things, like with anything. It's like a movement in yoga, or maybe it's like somebody watches your stride while you walk or you run, or just like your sitting posture. It's like all of a sudden you make this correction, and it's like you've got to teach your body muscle memory all over again, because what you've been doing is just what you've been doing, and it's like that's what feels right to you, so you have to like recorrect it. So it's it can feel like frustrating in the moment, but I think it's good in the long term for sure.
For sure.
Amazing. So I want to dive into kind of like the business side of what you do. And something that stuck out to me that you said, a couple minutes ago, is that you never saw like how you would make money as a yoga teacher. I'm curious, because I think that this is quite a common sort of thought process is, I like this, but I need to do something else because I'm not going to make money. I'm curious, as you got your teacher training and sort of dove in, how how did that sort of play out for you? Like, did you find that it was true that you weren't making money and you were very much relying on your other work, or what was that sort of like when you first started?
Well, what was interesting is when I first started, I didn't have my other work because the way the insurance industry worked, they went through some political changes, and they no longer were referring out their files, and so the doors on that changed and closed. So I was at a crossroads and was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be teaching, because I now had gotten my teaching certificate. I had been to India. I had gotten some more training, and it was like, okay, this is all I've got. So I guess I'm going to start. And it just happened. It happened very, very quickly. And when I look back, the key factor that made it work was that when I had been at the studio, I had recognized that the big key things that were in the way of people getting better and progressing and just feeling good were what was going on in their shoulders and their hips. And a lot of yoga poses, pretty much all of them, have something happening in the hips and the shoulders. And so I started off by just offering programs for the shoulders and the hips. And I knew I wanted to do it therapeutically because that just seemed to be the clientele who was coming to me. And so I wrote up about, why improving your shoulders and your hips helps your neck and your back and your knees and your this and your that. And so that's what I offered. And surprisingly, it worked. And people just kept coming, and then massage therapists started to refer, and physios started to refer, and physios would call me up. And so in Canada, we call them physiotherapists, or physios for short. In the United States, they're called physical therapists.
Mm-hmm. The first time I heard somebody's like, I saw a PT. I was like, isn't that a personal trainer?
Yeah. And there's PT, yes. And they would call me up and say, can I come to a class? Can I see what you do? Like, what is it that you do? I'm like, sure, come. And so I was very open, and what they started to see was being able to be a bridge between what it is that they were doing and where their patient or their client wanted to go. Because the rehabilitative world, they help the person get so far, but then there's a part where the person has to sort of take the baton and get back to life. And so I provided that space for them. And then I just started to look for other opportunities. Like I started working with the Lupus Society and a few other organizations like that, and that was all volunteer. But it just got my chops. It just really practiced what I was doing, and the classes, the groups just grew, and I found my own space to rent so it was one of those things, because I was clear on what it was that I was offering and how I was offering it. It led to the results that I was wanting. So my practice grew really quite quickly. Now there was one thing that added to this, which I still kind of keep in mind today, and that is when people were in my group classes. And they were full, because I would take only 10 people per class. And someone would call up and say, I want to get into your class. And all I did was register classes. I never did drop-in, because I wanted people. Back then there was no drop-in in Calgary, so I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a model for drop-in. But I never went to drop-in because I wanted people to be committed to the process. And drop-in, it's difficult to do that and help someone therapeutically. Mm-hmm. And so the people would call up, and I would say, okay, I need to check in with my current group to see if anyone's leaving for the next session, and then I'll call you back. And so I would then go to my group and I'd say, okay, I've got someone who's interested in joining the next session. The session's currently full, but if you're thinking about moving on, can you let me know? And then I can let this person know. And the reason I did that was because there was a time when I was at the studio where my classes became popular, and then people would call up asking for my class, and the current people would then lose out on the next go around, and they were really upset about it. And so I thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm always going to give the people who are currently in the class first dibs. But I didn't actually realize what I was doing. I was doing it because I cared. I was doing it because I wanted to serve the people who wanted to learn from me. I mean, I just wanted to help those people. But ultimately, what I was doing was I was creating this, oh my gosh, someone else wants in. Well, I better keep my spot if she must be good. Or the person who was on the phone saying, oh my gosh, she's got a waiting list. She must be good. So I was inadvertently creating this demand, which was never my intent. My intent was simply to help people. And so very quickly, because of that, I created a very long wait list very quickly. And then that helped grow my private sessions, and it helped develop some other things that I was doing in workshops that I started to offer. And while I kept teaching, I kept using that from the position of, I want to work with people who want to work with me. And if you're in my little tribe, then you want to stay, then I'm going to serve you the best that I can. And then when there's a spot open, then somebody else can come into that space, and we can get going that way. So it was always from a place of my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love so much about that. I think it's a reminder that, like, when you're offering something that people genuinely want, it's not hard to kind of fill those classes. And I do also think that it's interesting. You did strategies that people like teach in courses that cost, thousands of dollars, kind of like without like intentionally doing any of that. It kind of just happened very organically and very naturally. Like, okay, this is how many people I can take on, and this is how I want to serve them. And then when there's space, the next person can come in. So yeah, that's really cool to hear.
And I was actually horrified when I had a wait list because I'm like, I need to help more people. How do I help more people? And I remember talking to a more senior teacher, and she said, it's a good thing. And I'm like, but I feel terrible that I can't help them if they have to wait. And I went through a real crisis thinking, oh my gosh, like, and so then that's when I started offering workshops and at least providing something. And then I started doing some recordings, and it just kind of blossomed. Yeah, it blossomed from there. But I mean, it's funny because even when I was writing emails out and started doing that, it actually came from a place of, I really want to help people. So I taught an anatomy workshop, and this was before email marketing was really a thing. I had a little Outlook thing, and I could see people's eyes glazing over. And I said, do you want me to send you like a weekly summary about the workshop just to kind of keep you going? And they're like, yes, that'd be awesome. Well, I started sending that. And about 5 weeks later, someone emailed me and said, I want to get on your list. And I'm like, list? What list? Oh, I have a list? And so I just started doing more of those emails. And I had a small little like, oh my gosh, but this person hasn't done the training. How is it going to help them? And they seemed to be helped by it. So then I kept doing it. And that there are people who are on that particular email that I send. I now send that out every week. And I've had people on that for 10, 15 years now. And there's a lot of people who've never done a training with me, but have learned from that particular email I send out, which I'm completely fine with. If that's all they need to keep them going, I'm good. Like, they don't have to purchase. I just want people to know that they can get better and they can get well. And I remember, the reason I bring that up is I remember there was a time where I was learning more about business, and I was learning about, well, you should do it this way. And I tried to do it a way that I was taught, and it was no longer from my heart. The heart part left. And then within 2 emails, I'm like, I can't do it this way. I have to do it this other way that's much more soul connected, much more spirit connected, much more heart connected. That's the only way I can do this. It's not about money, although I was doing very well. It was the journey. It sounds so crazy. It was the journey and the process, and it still is. And so it's got to come from that place for me, or it's never going to work. And so it's good, I think, because it keeps me really real, and it keeps me really honest, and it keeps me on track. And when I feel like I'm getting off track, which is not very often anymore, then I've got my barometer. I've got my way of getting back on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love so much about that, because I think that, one of the things, or one of my beliefs when it comes to like mixing yoga and business, is that it does need to be coming from a heart-centered place. Like, we always need to look at like, okay, when I'm typing out this email, like, does this feel like me? Does this feel like something that, the people that I've, got access to their inboxes, like, is this something I want to send to them? Is this like a company that I want to work with? Is this a brand that I actually feel excited about sharing with my audience? I feel like it's always important to kind of come back to that. I think of it as like a compass, and it's like, is the compass doing that crazy thing where it's kind of like spinning around a lot, or is it like pointing directly like north, like where you need to go type thing? And you mentioned like it not being about the money, which I think is great. Did you ever have any sort of, I guess, like challenges personally around like accepting money for your work, or did it always feel like very natural to like accept money in exchange for the offerings that you were providing?
I have a funny story about that. For the most part, no, it wasn't difficult. But I had these moments where I remember one of the first privates that I taught. I actually think it was the first private I taught, and the person at the end of it said, "Well, how much is it?" I said, "It's 60. Is that okay?" And she's like, "Well, if that's what it is," and it sort of struck me. I'm like, "Duh, if that's what it is." And so I think I was nervous, and times when I raised my prices, I've always been nervous when I've raised them. But I haven't had, I haven't been someone who struggled with the spirituality of money. That I learned early on that money is a currency and it's connection, and it comes in that way. And when there's disconnection, funnily enough, money seems to go away. And when there's connection, it, funnily enough, connects. And so it's understanding what that connection is and getting into that space, which, as I referred to just a moment ago, around, for me, it's about this heart space and alignment and awareness and doing it really as a way of helping and teaching. And I think if you were to watch me or read the things that I write, or watch me in a training, there's not a lot of distinction between what I write and what I write that might appear to be a marketing thing, and what I am teaching. Like, to me, I'm teaching all through it, which is why I'm completely okay if people want to consume videos that I offer for free, then and that's all they want to do. I'm completely okay with it, because if they're getting something from it, then awesome. And then if they want to pay me to do more intense or more committed work, then awesome. And I'm just happy to get what I know works out into the world, and those who find it perfect.
Right. So it's not coming from a place of like pushing people to buy products or services. It's more coming from a place of like, here's what I offer. If you are feeling like you want to pay for a training or a workshop, or like, working with me in some capacity, then that's amazing. And if not, then here's what I offer for free. Yeah. And people then also learn what kind of person I am and what they can expect. And what they can be clear about in terms of what they'll get. And I'm a sort of a no fluff, say it like it is kind of person. And that's what they can expect when they work with me. And so, someone once said to me, you're very skill-based versus information-based. And so I want to be able to, if someone wants to learn from me, I want to help them be really good at what they want to be good at. And so that's where I like to focus. And so, so people can step up to that commitment and play that game, or work with the others that they can sort of play around with and experiment with and kind of diddly, or, I mean, that sounds really bad, but I don't mean it that way. It's just sort of toy with the concepts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's always like, when somebody sort of discovers you, I feel like there is this sort of like, let me like kind of, like play around with it a little bit. Like, let me watch some videos, let me try it out myself. And I feel like there is kind of that period where they're just kind of like sitting like on the outside, sort of observing a little bit before like actually diving in. Like, I think most people kind of go through that phase before they become like, I guess, a paying customer, you could say, or maybe like a dedicated customer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there needs to be a fit. There needs to be a fit between me and them for them to, for it to work at all, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And so I'm curious, what are some of the biggest, I guess, business lessons you could say that you've learned throughout your career as a yoga teacher?
I think the first one is what I've already mentioned around it to remember to keep the yogi in the yogi business. And this is what I teach. I run a yogi business program for people who finish the intensive. And that's really what it's all centered around is this is not about hustling. It's not about being slick with marketing. It's about communication. It's about relationship. That's what business is all about. It's about relationship and being belly to belly with people and really serving and helping them and doing more for them than they can imagine. I think that's the first one. I think the second one came as I became more known and also had more to do. So I went from teaching people who weren't teachers to then training teachers, and then that grew quite substantially, and being able to have the systems in place to manage it all. And so I think there's a learning that as you grow, we can hit upon, or we often hit upon, what an executive coach named Dan Sullivan has coined, the ceiling of complexity. And that ceiling of complexity is where everything feels like it's like you're getting stressed and overwhelmed and things are falling through the cracks and balls are being dropped and there's just like, and there could be chaos as well. And to recognize that doesn't mean you got to stop. It just means that you need to simplify. And when I first hit those spots, learning that concept was really important, because then it helped me understand what I needed next and what support I needed. And what's really great in this day and age is you don't need to hire an assistant per se. You can purchase something like Acuity Scheduler or other scheduling tools that can help you with booking. There's lots of other apps and services that are simply a plug and play that you can utilize to free up your time so you can continue to do what you're doing. I think that's a big lesson, and to recognize that it's not always easy. Like, business can be very hard sometimes, and people can get upset and can be unhappy, and that's just like what happens. That just because I'm working within my heart space, and just because I'm doing the thing that I know is right for me, and I'm in line, doesn't mean that everyone is going to be happy with what it is that I offer, and to recognize that, and to work with those times in a way that is a heart-centered way, so that while someone might be disappointed, there's a resolution that serves both people. So there's a way to work with those types of relationships if they were to show up, because they ultimately will, the more you work with people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. I love all of that stuff. And I definitely love what you were saying about like the systems and the processes. I think that sometimes it can be scary to sort of watch your business grow, or to see things kind of grow a lot. Like, I think there's definitely, for most of us as, I guess, like yogi entrepreneurs, there's sort of this like fear of failure. But then I think sometimes there's also this fear of success, because most of us, like, we don't know what that looks like and how we're going to deal with it. And it can be just as scary as it not working out. And I've found, like, as my business has grown, it's definitely about like processes and systems. Like, it's just stuff that like has to happen. Otherwise you're just going to like completely drown in work and emails and that sort of thing. I know you mentioned the booking tool that you use. Are there any other tools that you find to be really, really helpful to kind of streamline your business and just kind of staying afloat and being able to focus on like what is like super important in your business, which is the actual teaching?
The Acuity Scheduler is our particular booking tool. The other is, might sound funny, but it's an app called Receipt Bank. And so Receipt Bank is where I send all my receipts. And so I can take a photo of the receipt if I'm out and about purchasing something for the business. Or if I get the receipt via email, I can forward it to Receipt Bank. Or I can even set up the person who's my vendor or who I'm purchasing from. They can send it directly. And what's lovely about that is it streamlines and categorizes that receipt process. So the person who's my bookkeeper or accountant can then take care of all the expenses and allocate them properly. And they don't have to come back to me and saying, where is this and where is that and where is this and where is that, and which can take an incredible amount of time. So that is an incredible tool. It's called Receipt Bank, and you can also set up. I believe you can set up Receipt Bank to also pull from automated billing. Like we've got we utilize Infusionsoft as our email deliverer for our broadcast emails and that sort of thing. And so that's a monthly fee, for example. And so that goes directly, that pulls directly to Receipt Bank Receipt Bank pulls directly from that, so that I don't have to send it every single month to Receipt Bank. It pulls it naturally, not natively or something. I think that's the term you used for it, but it pulls it automatically. So that's a really effective tool. And I introduced my husband to it, and he has a small company which creates safety plans for construction companies and big high rises and all that. So he's got a number of receipts, not as many as I do, but even for him, he can easily set that up, and it goes directly to his bookkeeper, and she can allocate it. So whether you're big or small, it's really useful as a place. It's better than a shoebox, and it can help you organize and help your bookkeeper or your accountant, who then may do your taxes, or whoever does your taxes at the end of the year, to be able to know what it is all about, and then just have it being track of. So if the government does decide to come back and say, hey, what is this about? You've got it easily and can find it very easily.
Yeah, I love that. Just, as it's like approaching the end of the year, starting to look at, tax stuff for 2018. And it's just that time of year where I'm just like, oh God, this is such a nightmare. And I'm organized too. Like I'm not even like somebody who's a total hot mess with my stuff. So I love that. Like I think when it comes to processes and organization, it's so nice to be able to just look at like, okay, that might be something that you would either need to pay somebody to go through and do, or you'd need to spend probably like 10 or so hours just getting organized, and that you can just in the moment, takes probably like 5 or 10 seconds to do. And then you don't have to worry about it again. It can go straight to your accountant. They can deal with it. And it makes that like aspect of your business so much less stressful, which then doesn't make you resent your business. Because I think, stuff like, I love business stuff. I hate stuff like taxes though. Taxes and accounting, not my forte. So anything that kind of like makes you feel resentful about the like money and clients you're bringing in, I feel like it's good to find a process to streamline for.
Oh yeah. And it's when I teach the business program, one of the things that I find a lot of people actually hire first when they get busy enough is a bookkeeper. That's and it's not that I suggest that they do it. It's just that they realize they really dislike it, and it's a drain. So when people realize what that drain is, then they're able to find or fulfill whatever piece of that makes sense to fulfill, and and then they can move easily forward much more effectively, right? So and that's kind of the process. Is you get busy enough. And you might hit a ceiling of complexity and then say, okay, what can I do to simplify? Okay, what here is the thing that I really don't need to be doing right now that would free up? And there's a book that I read called The One Thing by Gary Keller, who created the real estate company Keller Williams. And he actually said, what is the one thing that if you did it would make everything easier or unnecessary? Something like that. But it's great. It's like, what is the thing that if you did could actually free up just so much energy within you? And it could just be just Receipt Bank. That's it. Like it could be you taking a photo of a receipt and shipping it off, and then that's done. Right. So it doesn't have to be, that part of it doesn't have to be hard. it's just knowing and kind of getting it's sitting quietly enough to say, okay, what's the thing that's annoying me right now? What's the thing that's the drain? What's the thing that, if I could get this one resolved, would make my life so much better. Yeah. And then, as you said, then you don't need to resent your business, because your business can then serve you and you can serve it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that for sure. That's an amazing tip. Is there anything else you want to share today about, just yoga business, that sort of thing before we wrap up?
I think the fundamental key is to recognize it's all the same thing, right? How we are in our practice and how we are in our business. There's a similarity to it all. And when we can get quiet enough and we can become aware of the thing that's actually the thing, like what's really the thing, then we can become a lot clearer on solving the problem that is and not circling around the problem that isn't. One of the things I realized looking back on the pain that I had as a younger person is that I was circling around trying to solve the problem that wasn't. And what I now can say to people is, when you find yourself week after week after week still in the same state, it suggests that you just haven't sorted out what the real problem is. Because when we give the body what it needs, the body will change very quickly. And I find that that's the same within our business. I can't tell you the countless number of times I've solved the wrong problem.
Yeah,
which was no solution. But but sometimes that's what we do. We kind of have to kind of play around and figure it out. And then we see that we're not getting the solution we need. And it's not that we're the problem, although sometimes that can be the case in how we're maybe doing something, but it's more about, we just haven't got quiet enough to really look at, okay, what's really going on. And when I refer to, maybe it's that's the problem. Maybe we're not doing the job. Maybe we're not doing the work. But then we can sit quietly with that. But to sit with this, like the quieter that we get, that's really ultimately it. The quieter that we get, the more we're willing to take a look, the easier and the quicker we'll get to the real problem. And as we mentioned earlier, sometimes that awareness can be a bit horrific. But if we get there, then we get there sooner rather than later, and can solve a whole bunch and experience way more fulfillment and success and just be a lot happier in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, where can people go to find you if they want to learn more about you, your offerings, maybe do like a course or a training with you?
Sure. Well, there's 2 or 3 ways that people can. If they're Facebook users, they can find me on Facebook at Functional Synergy. That's my page where I put a lot of videos. That's one. I'm also on Instagram at susi.at.functionalsynergy. If they want to delve right into how does she work with something like sciatica, then I've actually got an automated process, and they can actually look at what that is from a business perspective too. I've got an automated process where they can text me, and then they will get access to a video on how I work with people with sciatica, and they'll get a lot of understanding of my approach. And so they can actually text 587-816-4289, and I can give you that number for your show notes. But they can access and they can get a sense of how I do that, or they can just go to my website at functionalsynergy.com and they can peruse through there and see more about what's going on there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into your content a little bit more as well and just learn more from you. So thank you for this conversation, Susi. It's been awesome.
That's great. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Susi Hately. Make sure you go check her out, follow along with what she's up to. You can find notes and links and all that good stuff from this episode of the show at mbomyoga.com. You can follow along on social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. You can join the private Facebook community at Yoga Business Badasses. So on Facebook, just search that in the search bar, find the group. There's a couple of basic intro questions you can just answer them and come on in. And we've been talking about some really awesome topics in there. It's a really supportive community. If you've got any questions about yoga business, or you want to get feedback on anything, or just kind of bounce ideas around. So hopefully you'll decide to join us there. Just a quick reminder that Megan Farrell from Balance by Megan and I are hosting a retreat in Costa Rica, November 2nd to 9th. There's more details up on my website at mbomyoga.com/retreat, but it is designed for you, yoga teachers, wellness professionals. It's going to be a week of sun, sand, yoga, waterfalls, great food, and of course, a little bit of business. But I promise business can be fun. So if you have any questions about that, definitely reach out, info@mbomyoga.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.